And we're really thankful for Bess Moyer. She is a master level clinician and drama therapist. She's the founder and executive director of Coast, a Rhode Island based nonprofit with the mission to eradicate the opioid epidemic through arts based, educational, therapeutic, and community driven approaches. She also is the executive consultant of Improbable Players, which uses theater performances and workshops to address addiction, alcoholism, and the opioid epidemic. She specializes in treating trauma, grief, and addiction. She also practiced and taught drama therapy nationally and internationally. She is a playwright with three touring productions, one of which was commissioned in Providence, Rhode Island. So, Anna, thanks so much for taking your time and being with us.
Thank you. It's good to see you again. I wish that I could see everybody. I am a theater artist and I love speaking and I love talking about theater, but one of the big things that we're missing is that I don't get feedback, right? And one of the really wonderful things about theater and ways that it's healing is that you get to co-regulate your body with other bodies in the space. So I just want to acknowledge that this is unnatural for all of our bodies. And I may stumble today because not being able to see everybody is a little bit difficult. Okay, so I'm going to begin by just doing a really quick breathing exercise. I feel like, you've probably been jumping from presenter to presenter and you've been staring at your computer for a while. So let's just take a moment. If you can put your feet on the ground, if you're sitting in a chair, and if it feels comfortable to you, close your eyes or let them fall to the ground and take one deep breath in through your nose and let it out through your mouth. Deep breath in through your nose again, out through your mouth. And one more in through your nose, out through your mouth. So I hope that helped jiggle some things inside of you, maybe helped create more presence for you. I want to invite you to lower your expectations of me, lower your expectations of yourself, and just be here fully in the moment with me right now. So to begin with, I'm gonna have little touch points along my presentation where I'll be asking you to engage. And since the only way we have to engage is through the chat or through the Q&A box, I'll let you know when those moments are happening. And I would love if you could give me feedback through those two channels since I can't see you or hear you. So my first question or engagement question is, we're almost a year into this pandemic. It's wild. For a lot of you, you're thinking about where was I this time last year and maybe reflecting on the year we just had. So in that vein, I'm going to ask you if you could throw into the chat, if you could give a title to the last year of your life, what would the title be? And you can reuse the name of a book or a movie that may work as a title, or you can make one up. So if you could throw your responses into the chat and I'll read them out loud as they come in. I don't see any yet. I'll give you an example. I feel a little bit like if I would title the last year, especially here in the United States, Armageddon feels like one. Oh, here's some coming in. All right, I'm going to read these. So one person said, Saving Grace, Paradox, Finally Introvert Lifestyle Rules, exclamation point. What day is it again? Persistence, closed mouthed. Ellipses, a good year after all. My word for 2020 was focus and it fit. Personal growth, the only way is out is through. and learning to be flexible. These are wonderful. I invite you to keep throwing these in the chat. I just wanted, did I wash my hair yesterday? That's a great one. All right. Please feel free to keep throwing them in the chat and you can look at them. Hopefully they will help to lighten your mood if you're feeling down on this Friday. Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen. It's gonna be a little bit clunky, I'm sorry. I'm gonna toggle between sharing my screen and then talking to you. So here we go. So here am I. The presentation is called Creative Storytelling and the Empowerment of Recovery. My name is Anna Bess Moyer Bell. I go by Anna Bess or Bess, and I go by she, her pronouns. So before I dive into drama therapy and storytelling and recovery, I want to honor people that we've lost. The reason I do this work is because I would say that I'm in recovery. I'm not in recovery from a substance use disorder, but I am in recovery because I have lost many friends to fentanyl and heroin overdoses. And so I am in recovery from that loss. And then I'm also in recovery just with in solidarity with my community. Sorry, I'm putting on the chat. So I want to invite everybody to a second engagement. If you'd like to remember somebody right now that you have lost to addiction, and this could be somebody that has passed. This could be somebody that you no longer have communication with. I want to put out their names. So for me, today I do this in honor of Kyle. Bill, Erica, John, Jesse, Tommy, TJ, Bobby. Ugh, I didn't realize I was going to get so emotional so quickly. I'm going to read some of these names. Robert, if you could come in and help me read some of these names.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
We have Michael, Luke, John, Sam, Emmett, Kayla, Danielle, Joey, Scotty, Nunzio, Trevor Sloan, Jason, Ben, Ryan.
So I just want to give, and you can keep putting those names in the chat as they come up for you. I'd like to give a moment of silence. Okay. Thank you for putting out your names. Thank you, Robert, for helping me read them. So that was just an activity of calling them in, calling in their spirits, calling in their names, calling in their memories. Okay. So who am I? Who am I? Where am I coming from? What is the organizations that I run? And, what are we doing? And why am I here today? So as was said earlier, I am a drama therapist. I'm a master's level clinician. I'm a playwright. I'm a theater educator. I'm a theater maker. And I am somebody who's lost lots of friends and loved ones to the opioid epidemic. So that's kind of where I'm coming into this work. I did my first play when I was 6 years old. It was a non-speaking role in Charlotte's Web. I was one of her babies. I held somebody's hand and walked across the stage. That was my first role. So I've been in theater my entire life. I've done more plays than I can count. And theater always for me was a place of connection. It was a way that I could express myself. It was a way that I could be silly and playful. It was a way that I learned about who I was in relationship to other people. It was a way that I learned about myself and people around me by taking on different roles and reading different dialogue. And then it was also a way that I learned to teach my brother social cues and how and about interpersonal relationships. I have a younger brother, and he is on the autism spectrum. So he doesn't, the way that he interacts with the world is a little bit different than neurotypical folks. And I figured out pretty early on that if I could rehearse with him how to be in a train station, how to ask for something at a grocery store, in the safety of our home, it would make it easier for him to do those things outside in the real world. For those of us who are neurotypical, those things come pretty easily to us. We learn them pretty quickly. We have an easy time understanding social cues. But for folks on the autism spectrum, it just comes a little bit more difficult. And so that was one of the things I realized pretty early on, that theater and rehearsing roles and playing in the safety of your own home or in a safe space was a really wonderful way to try out different personalities or to try out different experiences, interactions without being out in public. So fast forward, I found drama therapy. As most folks who are drama therapists, we thought it was something that we created ourselves. And I did my undergrad in San Francisco, found drama therapy, and went and moved to New York City to go to NYU to study drama therapy. The populations I've worked with, not limited to, but I've worked in prison, in San Quentin prison in Marin, California. I worked in a VA hospital. I worked in hospice, and I worked in cancer treatment and a PTSD. I've worked for the U.S. Embassy in the Ukraine with children who had been displaced by the Russian insurgents. I've worked with kids with type 2 diabetes and their families. I've worked in substance use clinics. I've also worked with folks on the autism spectrum and with developmental disabilities. I'm currently working with migrant teens and refugees, and I've worked with homeless populations. So I've really worked with lots of different folks, and what I've found is that that everyone has a creative bone in their body, and that everybody really can get something out of drama therapy. So the history of my organization. So when I went to NYU's 2014, 2 years earlier, I had lost my high school love, my first boyfriend, the first person I lived with, the guy who took me to prom, to a fentanyl overdose in 2012. And I thought it to be an isolated incident. And I was living in California at the time. I was unaware of kind of what was going on in my community. And I decided to move back from California and move to New York to do my master's. And in the first semester of my master's, I had 3 friends die of overdoses in the first 3 months, August, September, October. And I realized, okay, these are not isolated incidences. There's something bigger at play here. There's something going on within my community. And so what I did was I really started thinking about drama therapy and theater and how I could use it as an intervention with my community. My community was deeply grief-stricken. For anybody who's lost a loved one to an overdose or to a suicide, those kind of intersections of experiences really muddy and complicate the ways in which we grieve. And a lot of times what it does is it makes us feel ashamed, it makes us feel guilty that we didn't do something, or that something went unsaid, or that we missed something. And oftentimes it makes us feel like we can't even speak openly about the cause of death, because somehow, like the earlier presenter was talking about, somehow it was their fault or somehow it was our fault. So I really started thinking about how theater and how drama therapy could be applied to my own community. And I held a community gathering, and the question I asked was what does our community need in terms of healing? And the three pillars, the three things that came out of it is what I created my organization on. One was people were feeling like they didn't have enough education. They didn't really understand substance use disorder. They really didn't understand what could prevent using substances or a substance use disorder. They also didn't know what the resources in our community were. And then the second one was destigmatization. As we all know, I don't have to say it, addiction is incredibly stigmatized. And people really wanted to destigmatize so they could really talk openly about their experience, their loved one's experience, without shame or blame. And the third one was communal healing and grieving. Like I said earlier, losing somebody to a substance use disorder really complicates grieving. And it often makes us feel alone. It makes us feel like we can't talk about it out in community. And my community really wanted places that we could grieve our loved ones and we could openly talk about what it was like to lose somebody to an overdose or lose somebody to addiction. So I'm a bit biased, but theater can do all of these things. Theater is a wonderful way to tell a story and to connect audience members to characters that are maybe similar to them or a little bit different, and really show a human side of an issue that they may not understand, and really help create that human connection and destigmatize, or take away the monster that they think addiction is, right? If you put it into a relatable character. Another thing that it does, community theater in and of itself creates community, because what it does is it puts a bunch of people in a room or a Zoom room, and you share in this communal experience. And there are these kind of boundaries that are set. We all acknowledge that what we're watching isn't real, but it's like it's real. We all we all know that we can laugh and we can cry, and that shared experience connects us to the person in the seat next to us. And then we all clap at the end, right? There's a feeling of finality and completion and connection through that. And the Greeks, way back to the Greeks used theater as a way to kind of look at what was going on in society and really put out these questions about what it meant to be a human being, and what were the gods doing and what were we doing, and how did those things interplay. A lot of Greek shows, Greek performances, at the end of the performance, when you left the theater, you'd go out into the street, and there were healers in the street that would talk with you or work with you after a performance and talk and reflect on what you saw. So the Greeks really pioneered using theater as an educational and therapeutic tool. So kind of fast forward, I wrote a play when I was in grad school. It was all about my experience and my community's experience of the opioid epidemic. It kind of zooms into, it's like a kitchen drama that looks at one family where the son is struggling with an opioid use disorder, and kind of what happens with that family when they finally realize what's going on. Going forward to today, we now have 3 touring productions. We have curriculum, and we also have drama therapy groups that we utilize with peer recovery specialists. And peer recovery specialists are folks that are working in hospitals and treatment centers, and are people that have lived experience, but also have an understanding of resources and treatment options and harm reduction practices that they can help support somebody who is seeking recovery. Improbable Players is a very similar organization in that they have performances about different addictions. I'm more opioids focused, but Improbable Players looks at alcohol. They look at vaping. There's a few different areas. And the similarity between both organizations is performances are used as educational tools, as therapeutic tools, as intervention tools, and all of our actors are people in recovery. So they're all professional actors, and they're all people that are either in recovery from a substance use disorder, or they are a family member or a loved one or have deep personal experience. The difference between Coast is a blend of those two. Improbable Players right now is just folks in recovery. So the folks in recovery, at the end of all of our performances, we have a talk back with our audience. And people can ask questions, they can draw connections between their life and what they saw on stage. And the folks on stage can answer from either their character's perspective or their own perspective, because they all have some personal experience. All right, I'm going to do a time check. All right, there we go. So I've been talking about drama therapy, therapeutic theater, and it's a pretty niche profession. So I'm going to take a guess that the majority of the folks in the room do not know what drama therapy is. You may have heard of music therapy or creative arts therapy, or even dance therapy, very, very similar. Drama therapy is the intentional use of drama or theater processes to achieve therapeutic goals such as growth and change in a client. I'm just going to go through a couple of the theories and methods that we use, so you have like a foundation, so then we can talk in depth about how we use theater in recovery spaces, how we use it to address the opioid epidemic and the addiction epidemic. So the main theory that drama therapy rests upon, because all therapy generally rests upon some kind of psychological theory, is role theory. And what role theory says is that as human beings, we are made up of lots of different roles, right? So I'm Anna Bess. I'm a drama therapist. I am a teacher. I'm a sister. I'm a daughter. I'm a dog mom. I'm a playwright. I'm a member of my community, right? So I'm a boss. I'm an employer. So most, all of us are made up of lots of different roles. And what role theory says is somebody that is healthy, in a healthy physical and psychological state, has access to lots of different roles and is able to kind of take on and take off roles depending on who they're in relationship with and or where they are. If I'm at work, I have a different role on than if I'm playing with my brother, right? Or if I'm interfacing with my father on the phone, I talk to him, or the way I interact with him is very different than if I'm on the phone with the IRS, that's not a great example, but anyways. So, right. So healthy people can take on and take on and take off these roles as they need. Somebody who is struggling from a substance use disorder, or somebody who has a history of severe trauma, or somebody who even has a physical illness, can oftentimes get stuck in one or two roles, right? They can get stuck in the role of victim. They can get stuck even in the role as identifying as the illness that they're suffering from. That's, when you go into an AA or an NA room, it's, hi, my name is, and I'm an alcoholic. And oftentimes people can get really stuck in that one identity, and it makes it really hard for them to take on different roles, right? Or that role really inhibits their ability to think about what it would mean to be an employee, or to be a good, to be a mother, or to be a good sister, or a good community member. And so usually this is when I would say, does that make sense? And then I would get a bunch of nods. So I'm going to say, does that make sense? And I'm all good. I'm going to look at you and pretend like you're all nodding. Yes, thank you. It's so unnatural to do this. Okay, so that's role theory. Seems pretty simple. I'm just going to open the chat to see. Yes, wonderful. Thank you, Elaine. Wonderful. Okay, so that's role theory. Pretty simple. And you can also see how that plays out. You know, that's directly from theater and from storytelling, right? We see people in stories, healthy people that are able to like take off all these different roles, or if they're struggling, they may get stuck in one role or one way of speaking. We are nodding. Thank you, Kara. All right. So something that I use a lot is I utilize the role method. So a method is just a way of utilizing the theory kind of in praxis, in embodiment with a client. So the hero's journey, probably a lot of you have heard of this. The hero's journey really, I am blanking on his name right now. It'll come to me. I've said it a million times, it'll come to me. But the hero's journey really is that all stories, somebody's going to save me. I know it. Joseph, thank you, Joseph Campbell. So Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, the hero's journey really is a structure of a story that's found in every story, every book, every movie that you've ever seen. And the structure of the hero's journey is there's always 4 roles. There's always the hero, you know, our main character. There is always some kind of obstacle. There's always some kind of destination, and there's always some kind of guide, right? So a couple examples. One is the Odyssey. Odysseus is our hero. His destination is getting home. He has many guides along the way, gods and goddesses that help him. And the obstacle, I mean, there are the sirens. There is Circe, who turns his men into pigs. You know, there's all these obstacles along the way. And another obstacle is just the sea and the time and the distance between him and his homeland. So the obstacle and the guide could be physical manifestations, people or things that get in the way of the hero getting to the destination. Or you look at a story like The Christmas Carol. You look at Scrooge, right? His destination is becoming a better person and becoming more empathetic. And he has a couple different guides, I would say, right? He has all the different ghosts, and even Tiny Tim. And so the obstacle and the destination and the guide could either be living people in the story, or they could be emotions or feelings or experiences. I hope this is making sense. Usually when I'm teaching kids this, I ask them to give me examples of these, and kids as young as 5 can understand this and are able to pinpoint in what stories. But as you go along in your life and you go watch a movie tonight or read a book, you will be able to identify those 4 roles. So we use that in drama therapy, right? And it's really easy to apply that to addiction. So the hero is always the client in the room. They're always you are the main character of your own story. You are the hero of your own story. And substance use disorder, addiction, that may be the obstacle. It may be your drug of choice is the obstacle, right? And then the guide could be sobriety and abstinence. It could be a sponsor in AA. It could be a peer recovery coach. It could be your therapist. And the destination is recovery. And depending on, if I'm working with somebody with a substance use disorder, the destination is going to look different from day to day, from year to year. Sometimes the destination is just that I'm not going to drink today. and the destination is sobriety for today. And then sometimes it's if we've gotten past today, or we've been able to get over a hump, or we've moved through some childhood trauma, maybe we're thinking towards the future. Recovery could look like, I have a job, I have a house, and I have a sense of purpose, right? Or it could mean that I want to move. I want to move to Paris. It could be a physical destination, or it could be an emotional or psychological destination. Okay, so I've talked about how we use theater to talk about addiction and recovery with both of these organizations. And I want to tell you just really briefly how therapeutic theater works. So, so the way that therapy works and healing works when you're working with a therapist is that you go into a space, you go into their office, or, we're all doing it on Zoom these days. And there's a set amount of time, right? It's usually about 45, 50 minutes, depending on who you're seeing. And there is an agreed contract, right? You're in a therapeutic space, you're meeting for a certain amount of time, you're working on maybe specific issues, and and the therapist is the therapist and you are the client. And then what happens is, because you created this kind of therapeutic container, then you project on your therapist, through storytelling or through talking about experiences you project onto them your personal experience. And in the kind of safety and understanding of this therapeutic relationship, you work through your issues or your traumas or your experiences. And a lot of times, for those of us who have childhood trauma, if it's related to if it's gendered, if it's related to a mother or a father, the gender expression of our therapist will play a big role in how we work stuff out, right? So if I have a male therapist, and I'm able to work out a lot of stuff with my dad because he's male. So that's kind of how therapy works just in general. You probably already knew that, but then how does this work when we go to the stage? Same way. So the therapeutic container is the theater or the auditorium or the black box or the room that you're in. You've decided, the play runs for 60 minutes and you're going to have a 20-minute talk back or whatever it is. You know what the topic is going in, right? You know that there may be some healing that can happen. And then, instead of having a therapist on stage, what you have is, you have a storyline, you have a narrative, and then you have characters. And while you're watching the performance, especially for those, if it's a story about addiction, for those of us who have an experience with addiction, we project onto the narrative, onto the actors, our personal experience. We find connections. Oh, she said something that sounded like when my mother said this, or my sister said this, right? And in that kind of watching and reflecting, action and reflection that's happening, you're able to gain a deeper understanding, gain maybe a different perspective that you hadn't noticed before, and kind of work stuff out. And then we always follow therapeutic theater performances with a talkback at the end. So we come out of the performance, out of the narrative, and we ask people to kind of reflect. So then that's that reflection period where you get to talk about what connections you made or what things you saw from yourself and the character. And that kind of helps just like end the session, cool down, reflect on what you saw, and kind of let go of the experience that you may have been experiencing while in the performance, right? If the performance has a scene where somebody dies, right, that may bring up feelings of loss that you've had yourself, right? And so the reflection period really helps ground you, bring you back into the here and now. And that happens in therapy too, right? You're talking about something, you get emotional, you can maybe feel some of the feelings that you have, and then you let it go at the end of the session, hopefully. I'm hoping this all makes sense. Aesthetic distance. So when I create performances, I hope somebody's sending me another, very much. Okay, thank you, Kara. So when I create performances, I'm thinking about a few things. I'm thinking about who's in the audience. I'm thinking about what, it's making sense. Okay, great. So I'm thinking about, what are things that I want the audience to know? What are things that I want the audience to connect with? But I'm also aware that, when we're performing stories, we're telling stories, we're performing stories, and we know that our audience has a deep personal experience. Like I know, from the names that were written earlier today, I know that there are a lot of people in the room that have that personal experience. So how do I make sure that when an audience comes in and watches a performance, that they're not going to leave undone, or they're not going to be triggered to the point where they can't listen? I One of the things I heard earlier is, the presenter earlier talked about trauma informed care. Drama therapy and therapeutic theater is trauma informed because it offers distance. So when somebody is generally when somebody is telling a story about trauma or loss, or a really hard experience that they have, um, if they haven't told it before, or if it's particularly triggering for them that day, what will happen is that they'll either dissociate, right? They'll kind of check out. They'll tell you the story with no emotional connection. They won't cry. They won't get red in the face. They'll kind of tell the story like blankly, right? And that's the body's way of kind of giving themselves distance because it's too painful, and it's too triggering. The other thing that can happen on the other side is when somebody's telling a story or reliving a trauma, they get too entrenched with feelings. They're too overwhelmed, and they can't do any reflecting. They can't see any different perspective. They can't see any way out. They're just too overwhelmed with feeling. And so what I do with theater, and what if any of you are going to write a play or a script or some kind of story, a wonderful thing to do is to rely heavily on metaphor. So metaphor, if I'm working with a client, and they have, this traumatic story, I'll say, okay, let's tell this story, but um, let's use Wonder Woman, or let's use a folk tale that you were told as a kid, and let's get a little bit of distance. So let's tell the story, but let's tell it through a different narrative that's similar, but not the same, but not exactly the same. The other things that I use in my performances is comedy. Comedy is so helpful. Laughing is so cathartic. Laughing helps us remember to breathe. It helps us remember that we're in our body. It kind of like let steam off a little bit. So when I write plays, I always, if there's one really heavy scene, I always write the next scene, some joke, or somebody drops something and it spills all over something to kind of let people breathe and let go a little bit, to help them regulate their body. The other thing that's really wonderful is music. Music is I think probably all of us use music in a therapeutic way. It's a great way to help regulate our body, maybe move a little bit, maybe it reminds us of a good time. So there are lots of different tools that can be used to help audiences really regulate their body and not get completely entrenched in the trigger or in the trauma. Woo! I am just realizing what time it is. I have until 1:30, I believe. Okay. Yes, right?
Yeah, about 125 or 130, yes.
Okay. So I'm going to ask another question for engagement. Given everything that I've said, and given your experience of either going to theater or watching a movie, how is performance healing for you? And if you can throw them into the chat. I'm almost to the end. Where's the chat button? I'm going to stop sharing.
I can read it to you if we have some.
Oh, thank you. That would be wonderful. So yes, so the question is, how is performance healing? I know that I'm not alone. Yes. Allows me to process my feelings if I wasn't able to at the time. I think it helps everyone to know that others may have similar experiences. It helps heal the issues in the tissues. The emotion that gets stored in my body that has no words can move through. I can live through someone else's story and see it more objectively. These are wonderful. That first one, I know that I'm not alone, is a big one that I hear from our audiences, is that they that having their story, a similar story performed in front of them, and being in a group of people watching really helps not feeling alone, especially when it comes to addiction. Sometimes I have a hard time identifying my feelings, and theater and film are helpful. Wonderful. Yes, totally. Storytelling, performance, film are a really wonderful way to better understand ourselves. Yes, not alone. Okay, great. So I'm just going to briefly say how I create the plays, how they make an impact, and who it heals and how it intersects with recovery. I was going to talk about kind of where I am in the last year and how we've reformatted, but I'll just keep it to that. So the technical term, it's also sometimes easier to feel through someone else's story when it's too painful to go through my own. Totally true. Really wonderful. These are really wonderful. Thank you, everybody. So what I call, so we call this therapeutic theater, what we do in educational theater. The kind of technical term that I use to describe the creation process, the script, and the drama is, we call it ethnodrama or ethnotheater. And that's just a fancy way to say that I source qualitative data. I source blogs, people's real life stories. I read articles about addiction and recovery and trauma. And I utilize all of that kind of data and story to create the characters and the storyline that you see on the stage with us, so that it is a true reflection of what people are really going through. Who heals? I've talked a little bit about how therapeutic theater works. So, you know, the people in our audiences are often people that have a close connection to the issue. So they, you know, as I've explained, catharsis and connection, great. You know, they're able to work things out. But then I've also said that the folks in our productions are all people either, you know, they're either in recovery from a substance use disorder or they have personal experience. And what does it do for them? Same thing. They're able to enroll in a character that is similar to them, but not them. So they're not being triggered by their own trauma, but they're able to act out scenes that may be similar to things that they have experienced in life. But because they have the distance of, I am not Anna Bess, I am Laura, I am Robert, I am this other person. I'm able to be in the action of saying words that are similar to mine, but I can reflect because I'm not completely overwhelmed by what's happening. And that happens in acting. Actors are present in the moment acting, and they're also reflecting at the same time. So that's kind of what's happening. One of the big things about recovery, you know, and the AA and the NA model and the peer models and all of the treatment models is that sharing your story is really, really important, right? So the way that theater works is it gives our actors a story to perform that's similar to their own. And then it also gives them space at the end to tell their own story or to draw connections. And they can kind of decide, depending on the day, how much they want to share, how little they want to share, depending on how they're feeling or how the performance made them feel that day. You said 25. Okay. So I do want to leave a few moments for questions and answers. I've mostly been talking about drama therapy and in-person theater. Obviously, everything's different now. We have reformatted everything to Zoom. There are bigger considerations now because we can't be in the room with people and we can't If we're performing to kids, we perform to kids in schools a lot. After performances, they can come up and they can talk to us if they have something going on at home or they need a little more time to check in about something. We always have therapists at the end of performances, or school psychologists, school social workers. We're now trying to figure out, if kids are watching from home, how do we then rope them into services afterwards? And how the entering and exiting of the theater is a great way to just like, I'm in it and now I'm leaving, right? Like when you go into a therapy room or you leave, it's a little bit more difficult with Zoom. You're closing your computer. I sometimes I have to create rituals for myself on Friday afternoons where my desk is in my room. Like, how do I really divorce myself from the work that I'm doing? So those are all considerations that are happening right now, and trying to change the rituals so that people are not stuck in the performance, or stuck in the thoughts or the emotions that are coming up when they do watch a performance with us. I have been writing Zoom plays, and I've really started looking at the intersection of recovery during a pandemic, the isolation, the disconnection from services. The relapse rates are going through the roof, and people, and people are at more risk because they're using alone, right? So that's something that I've been trying to bring into our performances now, is what is that now, that kind of chaotic intersection look like. And I think that good theater, um, great theater really brings in the present moment. It doesn't leave out the present moment. And you could be performing a Shakespeare play, but finding how it sits on February 19th at 1:16 p.m. In 2021 is really, really important. So I could go on and on. I really just want to open up to questions or comments. I hope this was helpful. I could, 50 minutes is not enough, but I'm hoping that I gave you a foundation. Robert, I can send you articles or links or things if people are interested in coming to our performances, or if you're interested in learning more about drama therapy or therapeutic theater, or creating it for yourself. Those are all things I can do.
I
Yeah.
think that absolutely everyone will be very interested in any information or materials you want to send, especially a lot of requests for contact information. One of the questions is this: are your plays available for others to utilize, or do you need to be trained to be a drama therapist?
That's a really great question. Yes, I have people across the country have used them before. And what I do is there's a licensure agreement or a royalty agreement, and I have written an addendum. So all of our performances have a talk back. And then I always, if it's a public performance, I like to have resources in the room available when people leave the performance, because what we found with our research is that if you come in and see a performance, you're way more likely to take social action right following the performance than if you were to wait a week. I highly encourage having naloxone available in the room to get trained and to get a free kit to go home with, prevention resources, treatment resources. So I have written an addendum for the plays, and I always have a conversation with somebody before about like, how do you, what kind of resources do you want? What are some of the frequently asked questions? How do you engage with people? That kind of thing. But yes, and I will give you all of our contact information in the chat, and I'll send it to you. And Robert has it as well. So
Um,
yes.
you mentioned sourcing your material from real stories. Um, and a person just said they would be willing to share some of their story with you also. Other questions that people might have. You've given us so much to think about.
Good. I hope it's helpful. It sounds like you've got a lot, people in this room already understand substance use, understand the experience. So I really wanted to, showcase kind of how we use theater to address it. So I hope that was helpful. Ah,
And I definitely see how on a university campus where, universities, even if they don't have a strong theater department, can partner with local theater in their community and maybe share space and resourcing to make this a community, town and gown kind of relationship to talk
mhm.
about community issues.
Yeah. I mean, the great thing about theater, and about, the arts is that, so you say, okay, you want to come to a presentation or a town hall about addiction, and people are like, oh, I don't know, I don't want to be seen there, or it's going to be too triggering for me, or whatever, what have you. But you say, well, just come see a play. It's a play about a family, or it's a play about these people, and they happen to be going through addiction and recovery, but just come see a play and have a conversation with us. And it's just a much easier way to get people in the room to have a conversation. And then you build in those safeguards. You bring in a therapist to help, with the talk back. You bring in those resources so that they're in the room if they want support afterwards. But saying, come to this fun event, this play, is, yeah, it's an easier way to get people in the room. So
Yeah, that automatically feels so much more disarming when you say come to play. Um, yeah. Let's
yeah, and the wonderful thing, I tell like parents or educators, if they come see a play with their kids or whatever, and they bring it back to the dinner table, instead of sitting down and being like, oh, I want to have the talk about addiction, or I want to talk about drugs, like you can just use the play as a jumping off point. Well, what did you see? What did you see in the main characters? What was going on with that family? What, you can use it as, it's just like kind of, it just pads the conversation a little bit and makes it a little bit easier to talk about if you're talking about a story than just kind of going headfirst into the topic. Sorry, Axel is barking at probably a dog that's walking by. So
it's just more players in the drama of the presentation. This participant.
yes, that's my stage manager.